so it's kind of heartbreaking.
It is
You know?
heartbreaking.
Yeah. Well, welcome to About the Father, discussing any topic whatsoever. So the floor is open. If anyone has a question, feel free to ask.
Do you guys got anything? I got like a quick, not even getting into the weeds.
Go for it.
Maybe.
Okay, and you? Well, yeah, right. Maybe. Now I remember last time when I was asking this question, but I don't remember how we answered it because we got off on other things. So, ringing of the bells
Mhm.
3 times when you're blessing the host.
Yeah.
Right around that. It rings once.
Yep.
And then the 3 times.
Mhm.
That's not in the anywhere. You don't have to do that. It's not part of the mass.
Yeah. So it's not okay. So it's not part. I should
Well,
make
that's not
it.
just my question. My question is,
Yeah.
does it have anything to do with the rooster crowing 3 times, or because it's right around? We're so.
I mean, it definitely is Trinitarian. I mean,
Right.
so there is an aspect of that, maybe. I mean, if you're talking about chronologically,
Yeah.
obviously Peter didn't deny Jesus at the time of the consecration initially, right? When Jesus
Correct.
said, but there may be some aspect of that. I mean, part of that is the Trinitarian aspect, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. But also there's also something that's unifying. So it's interesting that during the Epiclesis we only ring it one time, but then during the consecration we do it 3 times, right? So at elevations we do it 3 times for each one. Now, there can be like this understanding of the Trinity as one in unity and 3 distinct persons. I think there's probably something to that. I don't know if it in history has have anything explicitly to do with the Gallicantu. That's where the place where the cock crowed, or the cock sang, one would say.
Right.
I don't think it's necessarily wrong to make that the connection.
For me, as I'm there as a sinner who's about to be blessed with the sacrament of God, I'm directly remembering the mirror reflection between the 2 stories where Peter denied him 3 times, and then by the charcoal fire, Jesus gave him the opportunity to say, "I love you"
Sure.
3 times.
Yeah.
It was such a beautiful, and it's like Jesus is reminding me, here we go. I'm about to be forgiven. I'm
Yeah.
about to be taken care of, and this is what my God did.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say there's anything wrong with that.
Right.
I wouldn't say there's anything like theologically unsound with that.
Right.
As far as but as like the history of the liturgy and the aspect of that, I don't know if that was part of the original intention. It could be. I don't know. But you're right to say. I mean, part of that is we don't see this explicitly said in the Novus Ordo. So in other words, the general instruction, the missal does not indicate or direct bells being rung during the consecration. Now, as we talked about before, a lot of this goes back to a liturgist understanding of liturgy. So there's always these different aspects of a systematic theologian and a canonist and a liturgist. One of the biggest debates between a liturgist and a canonist is it a episcopal consecration or episcopal ordination, right? So I mean, I think, and I believe I could be wrong about this, but I think it's the canonists believe it's episcopal ordination. A liturgist will say episcopal consecration. So in that regard, I mean, if you're taking a liturgist stance in these things, you would say, well, okay, what does the tradition hold? What's happened before in the past? How have we actually done these things before the Novus Ordo was implemented? Because if the Novus Ordo doesn't explicitly say anything, it's kind of left up to interpretation and ambiguity. And so a liturgist perspective would be, well, if it doesn't say anything, you should refer to tradition, right? A canonist maybe, or maybe someone who's very, very literal would say, well, if it doesn't say anything, you don't do it,
anything,
right?
Yeah.
But a liturgist traditionally would say, let's go back to tradition. So what does tradition hold? Well, if you look back in the Mass of Trent, the Tridentine Mass, also called the traditional Latin Mass, also called the extraordinary form. Those are 3 syllables we used for the Mass prior to 1970. They would ring the bells, and it was explicit. The Missal would say, actually not just at the what they call the Epiclesis, but also during the Sanctus, like during the Holy Holy, you'd ring the bells. Then over the Epiclesis, he would ring the bells. Then at the elevations, he would ring the bells. right? So, okay, now it's interesting though that, well, why don't we do it during the Sanctus? Well, part of that's because the Sanctus is typically sung or chanted, and would the bells
Take
overwhelm or take away from that?
and- yeah.
I don't know. I mean, the purpose of them really is to actually indicate to the faithful, hey, you got to kneel now. You got to pay attention now, right? Because at the Holy, we kneel down for the Eucharistic, rest of the Eucharistic prayer. And then at the consecration, that's important for the faithful to know. So they're actually witnesses to the sacrifice of Christ, right? Become present to these moments. So it makes sense you would also do it at the Novus Ordo because the same thing is happening. Even though it is in the vernacular, usually it's still, happening. It's still good to bring attention to that moment in the Mass for the faithful to understand what's going on. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
No, my pleasure.
I heard a little variation of that back in probably grade school where we were told that the masses would be so many people there. People way in the back couldn't see what's going on there.
Yeah.
So they'd ring the bell.
You ring the bells
So
and you know what's
right.
going on.
I mean,
That makes sense.
yeah.
That makes total
I mean,
sense.
and so when we understand in the liturgy, there's always a theological and a practical aspect, right? So there's always those two aspects for everything we do in the liturgy, right? So like even to that point, okay, well, some people might ask, why do you use the big hosts? Well, the big host, so first off, it's an aspect of a recognition of the good of the priesthood, right? That the priest has the sacrifice going on, and he himself is taking that host upon himself. But also, practically speaking, to say, well, so people in the back can see the host at their door, right?
Right, because otherwise it's so tiny.
Right. You wouldn't be able to see Jesus. So it's an actual act. The whole elevation is an act of adoration. And the reason it's elevated is because, again, even the Novus Ordo, the Mass we currently celebrate at St. Anne and other places, it assumes actually the priest is actually facing the tabernacle. It's assuming that the priest actually is celebrating ad orientem. And so the elevation is still even called out in the rubric of the Novus Ordo because,
even more important.
well, right, it's assuming that your back is the priest's back is to the people, so they can actually
You don't
adore
have it above you,
Jesus.
they can't see it.
Right. So one would argue that in the pro populum, where we're actually facing the people, is that really necessary anymore?
It's tradition.
Okay,
It is
now I
tradition,
understand.
right? Now, here's one thing that's rather interesting, I think I'd say. Where did this whole understanding of pro populum come from? Right? This whole understanding of, okay, well, let's bring the altar out away from the tabernacle and let's have the priest face the people.
Yeah, where did that? That just kind of showed up.
Well, right. There's nothing written in the documents of Vatican II saying do that.
Right.
But what it does kind of point to is this authority of the bishop, right? So bishops within their own jurisdiction can make liturgical pronunciations, provided it doesn't contradict what the liturgy proposes.
That's giving a lot of authority.
Well,
to,
Right. I mean, it is.
It is, but that's also one of the differences I think between, let's say, Vatican II and other Vatican councils is what Vatican II actually did was do more allowances. So in other Vatican councils, oftentimes what happens, you have these what they call anathemas. You have these proclamations that are promulgated by the Pope that at the end of the documents that come out of those councils, they'll be say, like, if this person believes this, they are anathema. Or if this person says something counter to what this statement is, they are anathema, meaning they're cut off. That means really it's a Greek term, but what it means is excommunication, right? That's the Latin term from anathema, right? Is to cut away, cut off, or bring out of the community, right? So Vatican II doesn't have those anathemas. What the documents say is that there are these allowances that one can do, especially when it comes to liturgy, that are much different than what they were before. So if you were to go to an extraordinary form Mass, every particular detail is actually specific, either in the missal or in the general instruction. Even the way the priest holds his fingers, the way the priest would actually uncover the chalice, all these things are actually specified and explicit. And so, in other words, there's no leeway. You can't deviate. That's, hey, that's what it calls for. That's what you do. What Vatican II did was not necessarily change that, but it gave other allowances. For instance, the Mass that one celebrates. So, speaking with this with someone earlier, when you have in the extraordinary form, let's say today, for instance, we have a celebration of a saint.
Mhm.
Now there was a distinction in the extraordinary form between memorial and feast and solemnity. There were just feast days and non-feast days, and within those days, you may have, let's say, we have a saint that comes up on the calendar. You would implement that into the Mass itself, and the way that would kind of manifest would be, we have these prayers called the collects, or they have these things called the tracts, or we may look at those like the antiphons, right?
It always says in in your missal,
Yeah.
like on this day you may use this
Right.
because of the saint.
Right.
You may use that.
So what would happen is you would maybe have, like, depending on how many saints there are that day, maybe 3 or 4 collects, or maybe 3 or 4 tracts, or maybe a couple of antiphons, right? To kind of signify, we're commemorating the saint. In the Novus Ordo, you don't do that. If you celebrate the saint day, you celebrate the saint day. If you celebrate the ferial day, and most of the time there are options to do that unless it's actually prescribed. Like there's certain days that you have to celebrate that day.
Okay, so you're saying in certain parts of the Mass, with the what you say in the script and the readings, the dedications slightly are very. When you first said that, I was like, so now you can like wear a purple outfit or something, or wear sequins.
Yeah,
on
I mean,
you can't make those.
Well, here's the thing: like
crazy
most
things, right?
most masses that are celebrating extraordinary form are considered to be requiem masses, meaning you'd wear white or black, and so you would if you even like a regular like ferial day, we call ferial day. In the extraordinary form, they don't have ferial days. It's just either a requiem mass or a feast day, right? If it's a feast day, you wear the color for the saint,
For the
and you
feast,
incorporate those prayers into the same mass. So you would say, like, maybe so we'd say the first collect and the second collect and the third collect,
Mhm.
and then go on with the rest of Mass.
And the requiem mass would be like an ordinary time.
It could be. Usually requiem masses are actually for the dead,
Oh,
right? So that's why you'd wear like white or black,
okay.
But if it
So
were,
you're judging whether they're a saint or.
well, I mean,
A
again,
little bit?
For purity.
Yeah.
Or
I mean, the color would also, if there is no saint that day, I suppose you could wear whatever the color is for the particular season.
green or the
Right.
Yeah.
But most of the time it's usually prescribed, right? So with the Novus Ordo, with the Mass we have after Vatican II, there's all these different options, even things like the Eucharistic prayer. So in the extraordinary form, you only hear one Eucharistic prayer. That's it. The preface might change, and there might be multiple prefaces because of a saint or not. But the Eucharistic prayer is always the Roman canon. It's Eucharistic prayer 1. That's it. Right? Now with the Novus Ordo, we have 14 different prayers you can choose from any day. And some would be considered more solemn than others. But again, that's the liturgist understanding compared to, so in other words, if I were to go on Sunday, let's say Easter Sunday, and I pray Eucharistic prayer 2, okay. There's nothing wrong with that. That's the shortest one. That may be considered to be the less solemn one, but it's not out of line with what the rubric calls for because the consecration is still occurring.
You're still saying the needed things. That need to be done for
Exactly.
the consecration.
Exactly. Right. Now, the liturgist might say, well, for Easter, you probably should use the Roman canon. That's the most solemn prayer you could use. And I would probably take that tack too.
Of course.
But I mean, but also too, I mean, what the wisdom of the church is that there are certain circumstances that might apply to where, I just really don't have the time to do the Roman canon because I got 6 other masses in 6 other places I need to get to before the end of the day, right? And as we, in some ways, is kind of prophetic in the fact that when we see how many priests have been ordained in these places, and not just here but other places. Sometimes it's become more of a reality even in the West. right? Unfortunately. If we had enough priests, well, hey, there would be no need. You'd probably celebrate one mass a day and call it a day. But we are not in those times right now. So. Good. Any other questions, comments, concerns, heresies?
You're gonna ask this?
Why not?
I don't have it. It's not a question.
Oh, statement? Well, anyone online, we got a couple of people looks like watching right now. So if anyone has a question online, please feel free to type it out. We had someone in the meeting room, but I guess they skedaddled. That's fine.
Okay, so if you were to explain to me
Oh,
marriage, I know the purpose of marriage and everything,
mhm.
but how their readings are that there's no marriage in heaven.
Okay.
Can you explain more on that?
Only that Jesus says that.
Okay.
Right. I mean, so in other words, when Jesus is presented, in the Gospels, especially in the book of Matthew, the different parts of the Sanhedrin. So there's two parts of the Sanhedrin, the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And both these make up like the governing, ruling class of the Israelite people. Even like the scribes, they would be part of the Pharisees, Sadducees, but either way. These are the educated people. These are the ones that are leaders. They're the ones that interpret the law. And they're the ones that are sort of like to take the place of the priests, right?
Okay.
Jesus talks to the Pharisees and kind of puts them in their place because each one, even though they had kind of conflicting ideas, they also had ideas that coincide with each other, but some that were just kind of off base. So, like for instance, the Pharisees believed in the afterlife; they believed in things like angels. The Sadducees didn't,
Okay.
right? Each one of them would still believe that there's a God, but like the Sadducees would not believe there's an afterlife. Where the Pharisees were so like particular that they were so focused on the man-made laws almost for the sake of the divine law, where the Sadducees were kind of the opposite. So Jesus kind of like tries to point out the Pharisees, their particularities are not in line with the divine law, that they're actually burdensome to the people of God, and that they need to be kind of reviewed or at least overcome in line with what God wants. After he kind of puts them in their place, the Sadducees approach him and they give this kind of scenario. And it's kind of meant to trap him, but also then they saw the Pharisees, they thought that maybe Jesus was one of them. And maybe, okay, great, let's get him on our side. So they present this kind of dilemma. They say, okay, look, there's this man, and he has 7 brothers, and he takes a wife, and he dies. And by the law of Moses, the brother is supposed to take that wife into his home and marry her, and so on and so forth, until they bear children. Well, the first one didn't bear children, he died. The second one married her, they didn't bear children, he died, and so on for the next 7 brothers. And actually, this has Old Testament references, especially in the book of Maccabees. We hear about these 7 brothers that had their mother, and they were forced to eat pork, and they denied, and they were killed, right? And so the mother is there witnessing all this. So instead of a mother, it's a wife. So the question is, okay, well, at the resurrection, if there is a resurrection, that's what the Sadducees would say, whose wife will she be? And Jesus says very specifically, well, there is no marriage in heaven, right? They're like angels, and they're not given or taken to marriage. You're unified with God. You have a fulfillment of marriage in heaven. And that understanding is that the role of the spouse is to help that person get there. And that's what the church has taught about marriage, that
Right.
the role of marriage is a sacramental bond that grace is given in them to fulfill the gifts given in marriage. Namely, we're putting God first in our life. And by doing that, that unifies us as a couple to make us one. And please God, if it's so his will, that bond creates new people. We as a couple engage in the act of creation with God to continue the species, but also create more souls that are destined for heaven. So the purpose then is they're more earthly in some ways, but there is a eternal aspect of this too, in the fact that immortal incarnate souls are becoming existent and destined for that final end. But also what it may reveal is something what maybe heaven would be like is that, well, okay, there is really no marriage in heaven because that bond is fulfilled in heaven. Right? So once the one dies on earth, well, that bond is no longer necessary because the purpose of the marriage has been fulfilled. Namely, that person is now hopefully receiving their eternal reward. And not only that, but that now that spouse in heaven can intercede for their spouse and hopefully bring them into heaven, right? So,
Yeah, but if you've been married for 65 years and you die, you kind of want to make, you kind of want there to be a little bit of marriage in heaven when you get there.
Yeah.
You can find your wife or husband.
So, so yeah, I mean, but in some ways, that also is I mean, again, we were told this very specifically that the marriage is also a symbol of Christ and his church. That we as a body are united with our spouse forever in that eternal marriage, right?
Okay.
So, yes, there is something of marriage in heaven, but not in that natural bond that we may experience on earth. Now, but I think that too. I think there's also an interpretation about like, well, how does that work with married couples in heaven? Will they recognize each other?
Right.
I imagine they would.
I would hope so.
As we would recognize, we also have an identity. We also have a nature in heaven. We also have even a body in heaven that would be unique to us. So I imagine that we would still be able to recognize each other that way.
Yeah.
But I think the point that Jesus makes is that there's no need for marriage in heaven because that fulfillment has been maintained, has been met. Yeah.
It's often, some need to think about what our relationships will be like in heaven.
Right.
I think it's fine here. I am divorced, so I can't say but two people are helping each other get to heaven, and between that marriage and the years, you'll see little glimpses of heaven and God in each other and in children and that feeling you get, which is nowhere near sexuality, right? It's
Right.
pure love.
Well, see, that could.
Those parts that the tenderness.
Well, that also is open interpretation. Like, so I remember there was John Paul II was asked, and again, this is not definitive teaching because this was like off the cuff, whatever. But he was asked, like, do you think there's sex in heaven? And his response was, I hope so. And then again, it's not to say that there's lust in heaven or there's this like bodily desire, but the grace of sex, the fulfillment of sex, the purity of sex would be in heaven, right?
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I think a lot of these things are really open to interpretation.
Yes.
Because there's not definitive teaching necessarily in it. All we know is that heaven exists and that it's the fulfillment of all things.
And I would believe that up in heaven, your whole, it's just to honor God forever.
Right.
You're not going, where's my wife? Where's my kids? It's like, it's God.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
there's so much fulfillment that's being
yeah.
fulfilled. Right?
Because I think also on the flip side, some people might say it's like, what if my spouse isn't in heaven?
Right.
Oh,
Can
You
do
didn't
I
that?
don't know,
job,
right? I
did
mean,
you,
but then
right?
again, I mean, it's almost like,
It's your
You
job.
have
It's your
to-
job.
I mean, obviously you can, I think, in a mystical, loving, beautiful way, because the fulfillment of your children are there, the fulfillment of your spouse is still there, even if that natural presence isn't.
Mhm.
So, in some ways, this is sort of a relationship of like, some children might ask, like, will my dog be in heaven? And the answer to that is yes, but not in like a natural way. Like the body of your dog won't be in heaven, but the fulfillment, the joy, the affection of your dog will be there, and even amplified infinitely, right? So you still bring those memories, those things with you into heaven, even though the body of your dog wouldn't still be there. So I think that a deeper question is like, well, okay, this is really more a question of vocation, right? So my calling on earth, does that actually correspond to my calling in heaven? The answer to that is, well, yeah.
Hope so.
But in kind of different ways. I mean, because like you're saying there, John, yeah, we all experience, I think in every vocation, we hopefully experience glimpses of heaven with joy and purpose and fulfillment and grace. Doesn't mean we do it all the time. I mean, obviously, every vocation is meant for happiness here on earth, but also every vocation leads to the cross.
Right.
So, yeah, it's a little bit of an interesting mystery to ponder in that regard, right? But I don't think there's really a definitive answer on that.
So
As
then
far
I
as,
guess,
you know.
how is it then that Mary can be happy in heaven when not all of her children from earth are in heaven? Where does that?
Well, I think because her son is there,
Yeah.
and
but-
that's really the fulfillment of all things anyway, right?
True,
So
but
yeah,
I mean,
and it's not to say that, you know, I don't know. Did Mary know when she, you know, because of the gifts given to her in her preternatural, you know, gifts? Did she know that there would be those that wouldn't be reach their destiny? I imagine anyone would know that. I mean, so
She does
I think
now.
that's
Yeah.
such an amazing question because,
She has to now.
yeah,
you know, the woman who wails in pain,
yeah,
right?
right. In Revelation,
I mean,
yeah,
we're talking.
Right.
I believe we're talking about Mary.
yeah. That's the church would say that the interpretation that be.
And when we
that's
talk
for-
about being in heaven, you're always happy. Well, of course,
Yeah.
Mary is in heaven.
Right.
However, do I think
Yeah, she always happy. I don't think so.
in the diaries, it was saying that she's the queen of the water, like she brings refreshments to people in purgatory. You know, her heart breaks for
Yeah.
anybody who's
Right.
not next to
Yes,
God.
yeah. I mean, sure, but I think also too, there may be you know, if we talk about like who is in heaven, those that choose to be there. In some ways, I think there's solace and justice in the fact that there are those that don't choose to be there, and so it's a respect of the choice. There's like, okay, well, hey, you know, Jim Bob chose not to be here, and I respect Jim Bob enough as God does with that choice. And so I'm not going to necessarily mourn that because
So
that's
sad.
what he
It's so
wants,
sad.
Yeah.
right?
So sad.
I mean, I think it's sad for us on earth, but also I don't know if that experience is similar to that in heaven,
Yeah,
right?
right. We'll never know.
I mean, and that's the reason why I think our time here on earth is so important, is that we actually can mourn and actually bring about those experiences for a greater benefit, you know, namely for Jim Bob's soul, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, I don't know. That also builds merit for us and those around us, I think, too. Comment made here. I would think being in the real presence of God would override any human earthly emotions. Yeah, I think we would hold that too. And so, like, what is? I mean, when the scripture talks about God being angry or saddened, you know, we also have to understand this is a way for the writers to kind of put into human terms something we just can't fathom or understand. You know, even though Jesus is human and experienced human emotion, he experienced that in a human way. Is that the same in the divine way? I don't think we would say that. And that's not to say that we would divide Christ in his two natures. It's just that there's a distinction between the human and the divine. And what we experience emotionally as humans may not necessarily correspond to the way the divine nature, if you can even say, experiences these things, because, you know, in many ways, God the Father doesn't have a body. So, you know, how does that work for him?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, beyond our reason or understanding, we'll find out hopefully eventually when we're with him. But that's something that we would hold as a mystery. You know. And so we can still ponder and posit, and that's okay. You know, there's nothing wrong with doing that. In that regard, as long as the church hasn't definitively taught anything about it, we can kind of hold open things. And yeah, so I don't know.
Interesting.
Good. All right. Well, unless there's any other questions, we can call it a short one today, I guess. I don't know. Next week, we'll still have Brother of the Father. We're still in July. It is kind of crazy. We're coming to the end here. Of course, we have our great celebration this weekend on Sunday for not only our patronal feast day, St. Anne, but also our 170th anniversary. We're also having a celebration for our longtime parish secretary, Chris Hudson, who's retiring, who has retired, I should say. So we hope to see many of our parishioners this Sunday at the 11 o'clock Mass and afterwards at the reception and the luncheon. So that's it. All right. We'll see everyone next week. God bless.
Are you having to say all the